tough to get under my skin. Really, I'm brushing dirt off my shoulders like, it's nothing.
In the words of Taylor Swift, you shake it off.
Shake it off. That's what that means?
Yes, that is what it means. That's exactly what it means.
I thought she was talking about a dog when they're wet. We're in that water.
We're going to have to give you some Swiftie education here.
Trust me, I am Swiftie ignorant.
3, 2, 1, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in a DeLorean. Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly? The podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly? Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Tamara, you're creeping me out for a second time. What the heck? What the heck?
Second time, we just started. Wow.
No, the first time was when I had to watch this movie. That was the first time you creeped me out. Oh,
that wasn't my fault.
It wasn't. I look at you to see what we're doing. I don't look for the producers. I look to you.
But I am not the one who chooses these things, and you know, Hakeem, that I would never, ever choose a horror movie to watch. Okay, welcome to Does It Fly? For anyone who's listening, if you're a longtime listener of the podcast, you probably know by now, I am Tamara Krinsky, and I am not a fan of horror movies. Hakeem?
I'm a reluctant fan of certain horror movies, but the ones that freak me out, I appreciate them for doing that. But at the same time, I'm all weirded out, right? So, it's like some horror is actually kind of funny. Some horror, in my mind, introduces ideas that I hadn't thought of, like this one. Mm-hmm. And it really took me in an interesting direction. And that is the trauma direction, which we're going to talk about.
Wait, hold on. We got to tell people what we're talking about, because you and I know what we're talking about. No, we didn't tell him yet. We didn't tell him yet. All right.
We're talking about Smile. That's why Tamara hit me with the smile from the opening moment of the podcast, because it's so... I don't know how to call it.
For those of you who may be listening to this rather than watching the video podcast on YouTube, I opened up with a very, very creepy smile for Hakeem here. We're going to be talking about Smile, the 2022 movie by Parker Finn. There's actually a sequel to Smile coming out. Smile 2 is actually coming out. So we thought this was a great time to revisit the original. And it's a creepy one.
In this movie, we're talking demonic possession here. And we're talking about a demon that is a sadist. I mean, what demon is it, right? All right, so you want to set up the movie and how this demon actually torture, because it tortures people for quite a while.
Okay, so the premise of the movie is it's centered around a character named Rose, who is played by the actress Sosie Bacon. Rose is a therapist, and she has an encounter with a patient who passes along an entity to her, a malevolent entity. And the way this entity works, this demon, is that it feeds on trauma. So she, at the beginning of the story, and by the way, this would be the moment where if you have not seen this movie, and in this case, this is a more recent movie. Like a lot of times we talk about what I'll call classic films that came out, 10, 20, even 30 years ago. This is from 2022. So we really are going to get into some deep spoilers now. If you have not seen the original Smile, press pause, go watch it, and then come back and talk to us about the movie, or listen to us talk about the movie. Okay, felt like I needed to do that, especially because it's more recent. But
absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so it starts where a patient comes in. She's really, really upset. She starts describing, all these visions that she's been having. She commits suicide in front of Rose, our therapist. And as she dies, she has this incredibly creepy smile on her face. Then from that point on, Rose, who seems very well adjusted, starts to have all of these hallucinations. And what we find out is there's actually been a chain of 19 of these where someone has committed suicide in front of somebody else and then ostensibly passed along these hallucinations until it gets to the point where they then commit suicide in front of somebody else. So it's this entity that feeds on trauma as it goes along, and that's our story. We're trying to figure out what's the story of the movie is we're trying to figure out what's happening. We're quite frankly trying to figure out if this is actually happening or if this is all in Rose's mind.
Right. It was all a dream. I used to read Word Up magazine. But anyway, I was thinking, what if this happened on like the space station, right? You'd be left with one person. And that person would be like, don't bring me back. Don't bring me back. Don't video. Don't, yeah, right. You know, and as a matter of fact, I would say jettison myself into the sun, but actually that's incredibly difficult to do. That's one of the crazy stories of space is like, it's easier to leave the solar system than it is to go into the sun. That's a story for another time, but you know, at least you can go out of the solar system with this demon. And you know, this movie actually reminded me of a movie I watched in the 90s that starred Denzel Washington that really freaked me out.
Which one?
And it starred a demon named Azazel. And I don't remember the name of...
Oh, I know which movie you're talking about.
Yeah?
Yes. I'm going to give me a minute for like my brain to...
Yeah. Okay, so let me tell you what happened. So I rented the movie back in the day from Blockbuster.
Yeah.
On DVD. And my girlfriend at the time, she had some like DVD collections or something like this. And what my roommate did was took her DVD out of the player and put it in the Azazel case so he could watch that movie with Azazel. Because I was like, dude, you got to see this. It's crazy, right? And so when I returned the movie to Blockbuster, instead of returning that movie, Fallen, I returned her classic movie, and she was so mad.
Oh, no.
Yeah, she was so mad. But I'm like, what do we do, right? I went back, and they couldn't find it. So
are you telling me her opinion of you in that moment had fallen?
No. She's still, you know how it is with exes in the modern world of the internet. Every 5 years or something,
Fallen.
they send you
I was making a joke. Fallen. You didn't get my joke.
Oh, I didn't get it. I so missed it. I suck. Fallen.
No, it's bad wordplay. Too subtle.
Yeah. Too subtle for a nerd like me. So let me tell you what the movie... So Azazel, by the way, tortured Denzel Washington because the way it passed from person to person was by touch. And so as Denzel is walking down the street, different, you know, the demon is jumping from person to person and talking to him the entire time, right? And it was just really freaky. And that one freaked me out too. This one, you know, I'm going to be more serious than normal because it did kind of trigger me, right?
Really?
Because it's about trauma. And I had a traumatic life, right? I had a traumatic childhood. I won't say I had a traumatic life. My adulthood hasn't been traumatic. It's been great. But up until the age of 30, right? From like 4 years old to 30, there was a lot of trauma. And, you know, when I thought about how this demon passed from person to person through trauma, it really made me think about myself and like one of my biggest regrets in life. Okay. Yeah, because, you know, when you go through trauma and you don't understand it, it manifests in certain ways. And for me, it manifested as self-destruction, right? So I would say from the age of 19 to 26, I was on a serious self-destruction bent, right? And I liken it to someone who decides that they're going to jump off the bridge and end it all. But then once they hit the water, they start swimming, right? And so that's kind of how I lived. I pushed myself to that edge and pulled back, pushed myself to that edge, pulled back in different ways, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I was doing that was the worst was introduced to me by a close friend. Years later, he contacted me and, you know, he'd gone through a much worse adulthood than me. And, you know, he ended up kind of broken, you know, and he called me up. This was maybe, you know, 8 years ago. And, you know, we hung out in the 80s and, you know, up until around 1990 or so. And so he's calling me. It's like 2015, something like that. Yeah. And he says to me, he goes, Man, sometimes I think back and I think I was a bad influence on you, right? Now, you remember this is my close homie, right? So my reply was, damn straight you was a bad influence on me. But ultimately, I'm responsible for my actions. So you should have no guilt. Yeah. So anyway, this movie, it really that's what it is. It's passing on your trauma to another person. The person who's demon possessed, who's having these nightmares, they are being severely traumatized, right? They're at their wits' end and they don't know reality from falsehood. And, they're going through these things, but they begin to pass on their trauma to other people, right? And so the phrase hurt people is just where it brought me with this. And I know that's not the sort of scenario of the movie, right? The scenario of the movie is paranormal, but I think it really hits on, and look at today, we're in this.
I'm gonna do something crazy here.
Oh,
right?
okay.
So we've been doing these shows for a while now, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna suggest we actually flip our format. All the stuff that you're talking about right now is the stuff that I've been thinking about the story of this movie. So I'm going to go crazy here and say we should flip this around and have our story conversation first. And then I'll ask you what you were thinking about as far as the science piece of this movie and does that fly. But this is actually the story conversation because we're talking about the theme of the movie.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And this one isn't so much of a gizmo thing either, right? So it for me, it's psychology. It's a science of psychology, not necessarily the science of demonic possession, or which we already talked about.
Right. Yeah. So when we're talking about, does this movie fly story-wise, that's where I go. I go to this movie is a metaphor for trauma. This entity that passes back and forth, between people as it takes things from one to the other, is very much a look at the idea of, does trauma follow us through our lives? Are we constantly being chased by trauma? And what it does is it literally manifests that into an entity. It's taking
really that was their intention.
Well, different people have talked about it.
Okay. Yeah.
That's something that some of the actors have talked about.
Right.
The director has for sure talked about, the idea that for him, really good horror is rooted in some larger story about the human condition. And so he was very much interested in exploring that idea. I pulled a quote, like I often do. So this is an interview from Polygon by Tasha Robinson, where Parker Finn, the director, wrote, "Genre and horror is always my first love. And I want to make genre films that are character driven, that are doing some sort of exploration of the human condition and the scary things about being a human being. That's the stuff I really love. And if I can take that and twist it up with some sort of extraordinary genre element, that's the lane that I want to live in." And so all of what you were talking about with, this trauma piece of things,
right,
that's where we go. And, for me, not being a horror fan at all, I think he does a really great job of taking a freaking scary, creepy movie, but filling it in with this underbelly of this very big fear of what if I am going crazy? What if I am seeing things that nobody else is going to believe? What if I cannot trust my mind?
Yeah. And also the trauma shows up with a smile, typically, in my experience, right? Just like the espionage professional.
Yeah, for sure. And the way that they set up the rules for that, I think also stay pretty consistent, right? They set up this very consistent thing where, the entity, like we were saying before, it passes basically the entity pushes you to destroy yourself. You commit suicide in front of somebody, and the trauma that somebody experiences from that, the entity then jumps to them because it goes to where the trauma is. And in that way, the entity survives. So that has happened over and over and over. And they play with that throughout, right up to the end where, again, spoiler alert, there are essentially what almost feel like three separate endings that really F with you as the viewer. Because, first Rose does.
Now you're really about to give it away, but anyway.
No, all right. I won't give it. Well, it's just, okay, here's what I will say. There are three different pieces towards the end. And what I will say is that Rose, the way that he plays with this and the different ways that she might go about trying to end this trauma for herself work really well with the rules of the movie that they've set up and all of the hallucinations that she's had so far, all of the ways that, all the different relationships, the character relationships they've set up in the movie. So they're very consistent about that. And, you were joking before about like, it was just a dream. And,
right.
The director also talked about the fact he didn't want to do an "it was just a dream" ending because that kind of invalidates it all.
Absolutely.
Especially when you're dealing with these heavier themes of trauma, to just suddenly be like, nah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, right. yeah, exactly.
I sort of feel like you betray the viewer when you do that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that they thought of it that way because I went in thinking, oh, horror movies, creepy, blah, blah, blah. But what really struck me was the connection to my own personal life.
They very much play with the audience's desire to have it all work out and be okay. And very much that like horror trope of we're going to like lose people along the way. And, there's a group of us and we all start out and one by one they're picked off. And that actually kind of doesn't happen in this. But at the end, somehow our protagonist is going to defeat whatever the evil entity is. And so they really, again, I won't like completely give it away, but they very, very much plays with that. And he has talked about the fact that he did that very deliberately because he respects his audience. And he was like, I know that horror fans know these tropes. Right. What can I do to kind of play with that? And I think he does it really effectively. And I think that part of the reason for that too is because the way they build this whole movie, between the cinematography that they use, between even just like the costume design, like if you look at the costume design, Alexis Forte, who I think it's Forte, not Ford, Alexis Forte, who's the costume designer, talked about how like when Rose starts, she's initially, in like these sort of very polished professional clothes. She's very classy. And then as her mind starts to unravel, that's also reflected in her costumes. And they don't like hit you over the head with it. It's just you sort of start to see that reflected. So they use all the visual tools that they can to bring you through this thing.
It's funny, when you say it, the fact that her name is Rose, whenever I hear the name Rose, I'm reminded of Doctor Who's companion, the former pop star. Rose. But this one, man, when I grew up as a kid in the country, there wasn't the same sort of electronic entertainment. So we entertained ourselves quite often with story and music and this sort of thing. And one of the common story themes was paranormal stuff. And man, they would have us so freaked out. As kids, you would believe in this stuff. And so the whole idea of demons to a modern person, you're like, oh, there's no such thing. But there are still corners of the world, and they're still included in America, where people they are on guard for things like demonic possession and
I'm watching do you know the show Bad Monkey? It's on Apple TV.
Never heard of it. No.
It's newer. It launched it's called Bad Monkey. It's on Apple TV and Vince Vaughn stars in it. And it's, sort of a like ripe detective story down in the Florida Keys. Part of it's set in the Bahamas. And there's a whole magical element to it about curses and things like that. So,
oh, yeah. So like I told you before, my family was, practitioner of voodoo in my childhood, what we call voodoo, but it's not really voodoo. What it is, a mixture of Yoruba religion, Catholicism, right? And some cultural traditions. And the idea, like my mother, if I ever told her a story of someone who was not so nice to me, my mom would be like, oh, I'm gonna light a candle on their ass. I still today don't know what that means, but it sounds ominous.
Well, and see, that's where I go, like, all religions have a little bit in common because, like, I'm a nice Jewish girl from Jersey, and we would light Shabbat candles every Friday night. And to this
Yeah.
day, every Friday night, like, if something's going on, if somebody needs a little more good energy, if
Yeah.
we want someone to be okay, my mother will talk about the fact that, like, she'll pray over the candles on Friday night for them. So,
Interesting.
there's like,
Interesting.
you put energy out into the universe,
Oh, it's
however
true.
you
Yeah,
might
yeah.
want.
I feel that
And
way. Yeah, I feel that way. You put that energy out and it kind of comes to you. It's
Mhm.
either that or somehow we're quantum entangled with our future selves and we already kind of unconsciously know what's going to happen. And so we sort of like post,
there we go, talking about all that sciencey stuff again.
well, the question is,
I'm
here's
kidding.
how I
I'm
think
totally
about
kidding. I love it.
No, I know. Here's what this reflects on is how I think about paranormal phenomena and experiences of human beings. And that is that in the past, before we had as strong of an empirical scientific basis, you would just attribute it to your favorite idea. So in whatever culture you're in, if you have a premonition, you might say, oh, it was my ancestors telling me, or you might be, oh, it's the Lord who told me, or, whatever, right?
Yeah.
I've lost my train of thought yet again.
You were talking about the paranormal and how
yeah.
we were talking about science, and then sort of like
Yeah, exactly.
before we had access to all this empirical evidence.
So if you take people on their word that their paranormal experience is what they experienced, the question for me is, what is the physical mechanism by which that is occurring? Right. So instead of filling in the blank from my particular cultural, spiritual beliefs, I want to do actual investigation of, is it something that's happened externally? Is it something that's 100% within the person's own mind?
Yeah.
And
so
there are shared.
So
Yeah.
that brings up, I watched a really interesting TED Talk by this woman named Deborah Lampshire that our producers turned me on to, where she talks about auditory hallucinations, which she's experienced for most of her life. And basically, like, so, in this movie, Rose sees visual, auditory, even tactile hallucinations. This woman's are all auditory. And, so she hears voices. And she talks about this idea that, like, this is actually my way of dealing with anxiety. When I feel threatened, these are the things that try to protect me to keep me safe. So, like, yeah, some people might label that as crazy and that they're hallucinations. They're not really happening, but they're happening to me. So they are real for me. And, in her words, I'm paraphrasing here, but she basically said, like, you're not seeing a crazy person, you're seeing somebody deal with deep psychological pain. And I do think that actually, when I read that, it really resonated as far as this movie goes, because I think that applies. So I'm just going to put a fine point on it. I'm going to say that story-wise, for me, this movie absolutely flies.
Yeah.
With the setup of this entity, the way the entity moves through things, and the way that this entity, the rules of how this entity works really supports this larger metaphor for trauma.
Yeah, I'm with you. It flies. Absolutely. And I'm going to, since I already spoke about it a little bit, I'm going to say,
so science-wise,
science-wise, if I take it out of the realm of paranormal and I look at the realm of the psychological.
Right, because we're not, just to be like really clear, this is not a science conversation about this movie about, like, do demons really exist? That's not the science that we're talking about.
That is not what it is. Yeah, exactly. So taking it out of that realm, taking it into the realm of it's more psychological, then if you look at the psychology that's played out within it, I see it in two ways. I see there as Rose's experience, but I also see, this demonic component, right? And it I've dealt with my own human demons. I'm not talking about my internal demons, but the external demons. and the fact that the reality is they show up with a smile. That is the thing. Like, I don't know if anyone out there, and if you are, I may be triggering you, or this may be a group therapy session.
I was going to say, I feel like this is our personal therapy session.
Right? I'm
going to go away from here feeling cleansed.
Once had a relationship with a narcissistic personality disorder human being.
I'm sorry.
And when you meet such a person, the phrase for how they treat you which is so amazingly good, is called love bombing. The
So
demon.
all right, wait. So
Yeah.
what does that mean exactly? What is love bombing like? From
Well, this person shows up and they treat you. There's a sense that they have of what you need emotionally and psychologically, and they just fill you up, man. They're so amazing. And when I met this person, I literally was like, I have never been treated so good in my life. How is this true? How is this possible? How is this person real?
So what's bad about this? This actually sounds
It's not real. It's not real. They're just,
okay.
they are typically alone because it's an abusive disorder, right?
Okay.
And so, if you abuse the people around you, they're going to leave. Okay, so you need new people. And they know how to just suck you in through their charm and their sacrifice. I mean, they come across exactly the opposite of what they are.
They suck you in with the love bomb and then they blow your life up.
Completely leave a trail of broken lives behind them.
Wow.
Yeah. And I definitely experienced that. And it's the same thing with the more scandalous, like I said, when I was in the street, but then I had more of a radar, right? I had a radar for dipping and moving around certain people. And in my trauma, I was drawn to people that were, living the lowliest types of lives, right? So, like as an example, I show up at Stanford University. It's not long before I'm in the hood, in East Palo Alto, and not just hanging out with average families, but the G's, the gangsters, right? Because that's where the suffering was, and that's who I resonated with.
I think it's because you were drawn to that because it's where you felt comfortable and familiar because it's what you knew. Do you think it was self-sabotaging? Like, what do you think?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's a bit of both. I think it's a bit of, when you feel like an outcast, you're drawn to outcasts, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing about it is if you have an expectation of negative judgment of you by people in general, you're going to want to be around people that you're not going to feel that judgment from, right? And you're going to together be like, and there's a bit of this in our politics, right? So I had a buddy from Maine, and he's the first person to inform me of, the city, he's a white dude. The white folks in the city, they look down on us, and I'm like, I don't know if that's true. And then, but it's a feeling, right? There's this sort of rural, coastal dynamic in America that shows up in our politics. But really what it is just a feeling of the rest of the world is going to see me a particular way. And so when someone shows up with a smile and you're accustomed to rejection or worse, right? The people they may hurt you. And that's what, a lot of that was in my childhood. And so you get this tough armor to defend yourself, right? And you end up hurting people yourself. And that was my story through my mid-20s. Yeah. And that's when I realized, I started to make a change in how I saw myself and how I saw myself interfacing with the world, right?
Yeah.
And also, how I saw those people who are suffering and how you see, and if you are in that, the people who aren't suffering, you tend to have an animosity against them, right? The people who show up at college with a car and their parents help to take care of them, when you're young and you're like, had to take care of yourself, you're abandoned by your parents, like, screw them, but,
Right.
you grow up and you realize, no, that's not, that's not a thing. It's your trauma. It's saying something about you, not them.
That's not about them. It's about,
Yeah. And so I feel like the way they dealt with that in this movie was so relatable to so many walks of life because, suffering is everywhere.
Sure.
Especially psychological suffering, right? It doesn't belong to any economic class or racial group or geography or religion. We all go through it. Not every human being, but however you want to group human beings, there are always going to be people that are going through these psychological traumas. And the way the human mind works is sometimes predictable in a probabilistic way, right? There are people that, like I look at my sister and me, for example. Like our family was tough, man. I mean, and violent, but neither one of us is like that at all. And there are people that are, this is how I was raised. This is what I'm going to do. And then there are people who are, this is what I experienced. That's the last thing I'm going to do.
So that's interesting because and you see that actually reflected in the story of Smile,
Mm,
right? Because Rose
mm,
has a sister.
yeah,
And
right.
they are very much point and counterpoint where you have, Rose who's basically buried all of this trauma. And then when this entity comes, you
Yeah,
see it start to eke out in a million different ways. And
yeah,
then you've got her sister who's gone like, no, I went through a lot of the same stuff that you did, and I'm going to live my life in a different way. I'm going to find happiness. I'm going to find family. And whether she's doing that in a healthy way is a whole other debate and conversation. But you definitely see that. So like from, a psychological perspective, are there things that rang true for you? I mean, you're a physicist, not a therapist, but like from what you just know about like the way the human brain works and, some of the psychological stuff you've come across, I'm just curious kind of like what pricked your mind.
The thing that struck me is it's based on the current time, and that
Mhm.
is resilience versus fragility.
Mhm.
All right. So on the one hand, the experiences that I experienced made me an incredibly resilient dude. Right. It's
For
it's
sure.
it's tough to get under my skin.
Mhm.
Really, I brush the dirt off my shoulders like it's nothing.
In the words of Taylor Swift, you shake it off.
Take it off. That's what that means.
Yes, that is what it means. That's exactly what it means.
I thought she was talking about a dog when they're wet. Get rid of that water.
We're going to have to give you some Swiftie education here.
Trust me, I am swiftly ignorant. This is true. You spotted me.
All right. All right. Finally, a music genre I know that you don't.
An artist, an artist.
Some odd episodes.
Yeah. Listen, I'm into pop, even some international pop. But the other side of it is, right now I think there's this movement of, protect me from trauma,
Mhm.
and there's certain trauma to be protected from. And then there's also this thing about resilience, and so like where that healthy balance lies, like I'll give you an example. Right now in academia and the world of astronomy and physics, there are people that get sacked based on accusations. And there is a evaluation process that's done by the institutions to determine whether or not that person actually violated things and this sort of thing. And it is not like America's court system. In particular, there is no you have a right to face your accuser. There is no you have a right to put up a defense. It is basically we're going to do a secret investigation and inform you of our result. And there are people.
That doesn't sound fair.
It's not fair. It's not fair. And there are people who maintain their innocence. And then when you look at, and so it's not always clear.
Yeah.
But under the rules, if someone falls, their reputation and career fall to that, then you're not allowed to mention their name even in a scientific meeting. You're not allowed to display their name. So say, for example, that person was Edwin Hubble or Albert Einstein. And, there are people from the past like Richard Feynman who,
Right.
He was like, hey, I'm a ladies' man. I'm going to go out to the bar and trick you into coming home with me with my psychological trickery. Right.
Right. So wait, is Feynman not allowed to be?
No, it hasn't reached that way with Feynman, but it has.
All right. I was like, wait a minute.
No. One example is the man who basically made finding planets around other stars a thing we do routinely. Okay,
Right.
And so there wasn't any accusations of particularly egregious acts, but there were inappropriate acts that were reported, and he became this persona non grata. But at the same time, he created this infrastructure within the field, including a lot of data. And the ethical rules are, if I use your data, I must cite you, or I must co-author you. So now, if I want to go to a conference and present this work, and your name is associated with it, you have instances of people famously in our field that are being rejected. No, you're not going to be allowed to do this. But instead of saying you're associated, so what ended up happening a year ago was the International Astronomical Union put out this statement about being guilty by association sort of thing. But the whole point is that getting back to our human condition and resilience and fragility, I don't feel like we've made it yet, right? I don't feel like it should be the wild, wild west. And I feel like it's not in our best interest to wrap everyone in a bubble suit, because we do live in a competitive world. And, you know, a beast may show up one day that you need to handle, you know, because they always do, right? They always do. And so anyway, this deeper topic of what to do about trauma, you know, we've just come to a point in our society where we even have language for this, right? Before I wrote my memoir, you would have never heard me say the phrase, "Oh, I experienced a lot of traumas in my childhood," right? I didn't even have the language for it, right? But through, you know, the wonderful gentleman, Josh Horowitz, that I wrote my book with, and his deep insights into human nature and just being a wonderful human being. And, you know, I began to dig deep into my own psychology and what I had not worked out, even though I'm, you know, as old as planet Earth. So depends on how you define it. But so
depends on how fast you're traveling.
Depends on how fast you're traveling, but at the same time, it depends on is time all there or is it unfolding? So
right, that's all. Yeah. But anyway,
back to that, right? Yeah. So I know I'm kind of rambling here, but I do think that this movie, for me, these are all the deep thoughts that and you know, a lot of it interfaced with where I am in my life right now, and because I'm often a leader and a mentor. And for example, you know, you have to decide, how am I going to get this person straight? Are they the person that need a kick in the butt? Or are they the person that needs support and encouragement and uplifting? You know, like for me, telling me you're not good enough is one of the most motivating things you can do for me, right? And I appreciate my haters. Right. They motivate me to succeed. Giving me encouragement.
But that absolutely does not work for some people. I mean, for some people, that'll just make them quit. Absolutely. And instead, what they really need is to be uplifted, not coddled, but they need to like know that there's something there that they're doing right. And then they, you know, like I'm an achievement junkie. So I'm a competitive achievement junkie, but I'm an achievement junkie. So you tell me I'm doing something good, I'm gonna probably keep on doing it.
Yeah, you know, I'm like that too. And audience, do not use that against Tamara. So those demons with those smiles. Yeah. No, I'm the same way. I'm an achievement junkie, but man, I tell you, when I started helping people, I became a junkie with that. So in our world, we call it outreach. So every year when I would have an annual review, they're like, Hakeem, stop doing so much outreach. Basically, stay your ass in the lab. Shut up and experiment, right? Can't do it. Nothing, you know, no invention, no patent, no discovery is as fulfilling to me as helping people with their own lives. And there are a lot of people, you know, for me, it has been education, right? First person in my family graduated high school. I'm like, oh my God, look at this life I can have. And where I come from, no one knows about this. And we think that this education thing is not for us because no one around us does it. You know, it's like golf. You know, it's not for me. Nobody plays golf. I know
a lot of people who play golf, and golf is not for me.
I hear it's quite addictive, so I'm not going to go any further than I've already gone.
You should stay away.
Yeah. So all that said, I find that the psychology of the science in this movie is so deep. I find it to be really on point in many ways that they may not even have intended. So for me, as far as the science goes, this movie definitely flies. Now, here's a question for you about the vibe and feels.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, it's one of those things where there's something you don't, you know, it's unpleasant, but it's good. Like spice, hot pepper. It's like, oh, it's good, but it's so good, right? Oh, I can't.
Right. Yeah.
And I feel like horror is like that for me. I feel like horror is one of those things where, oh, I don't want to do it, but if I do, please creep me out.
I think for me, it depends on what it is. So like this movie, I can't say I enjoyed it, again, because I don't like being creeped out.
It was so creepy.
Yeah, exactly. And what I was about to say is I don't like being creeped out. It's not a feeling I enjoy. I don't like being spooked, whether it's like a creepy psychological creepy kind of a thing or whether it's a jump scare. Like I just don't enjoy that feeling on any level. That said, I respected this movie a whole hell of a lot. I think it was really smart storytelling. I heard, it was funny, I was listening to a podcast the other day. Ezra Klein's podcast, and
Yeah.
he was talking to somebody about.
I met him, by the way.
Huh?
I met him
I've met him too.
in Montana, in the mountains of Montana.
I did not meet him in the mountains of Montana. I met him out here at LA at a program that I was scripting. But yeah, so on his podcast, I forgot the name of the guest. It was from a couple of weeks ago, so summer of 2024. And they were talking basically about screen time and kids and what we're encouraging our kids to do and not do, and how all of that mixes together. There's a lot of talk about hallucinogens as well. But one of the things that they talk about, and I was thinking about this on the way over here, is that with kids entertainment, especially like young children's entertainment, you like 2 to 5, 2 to 6, is that there almost seem to be two categories. There's stuff that is entertainment first. So it is actually meant to be story driven. It's meant to entertain. It's meant to have some kind of value. And yeah, it probably has educational value as well, often woven through it. And then there's a whole category of stuff of like these preschool cartoons that is really just meant to be attention grabbing. And that is what it leads with. It's sort of like, what can we throw up on here that will just grab eyeballs, that will just grab attention, and all of that. Now, as adults, sometimes there's room for both of those things, right? But I was thinking about it on the way over here as far as like why was I about to say the general category of horror? I think I confused.
Genre?
I confused general and genre. So the general genre.
The general genre, there you go.
The general genre. The general genre. Anyway.
The general ganja genre.
That's a whole other category of movies, the ganja genre.
Ezra Klein. Anyway, yeah.
Anyway, but I was thinking about it as
you've been Krinsky'd. No.
Like horror goes, right? Because I feel like there's horror where it's not story first. Really, all it is like, how many times can we scare you? How many times can we put something like gross looking on that like is bloody or disgusting and just makes you ew? Gross out. Like there's all that. So yeah. So with horror, like with this, it felt like the story was leading. It wasn't just like, let's throw a bunch of stuff up on the screen to catch eyeballs and to capture attention. This was, let's actually put a story on screen. It happens to be in the horror genre. So yeah. So I was thinking a lot about that.
So what you're talking about, though, is taste, not quality.
I kind of, yeah. I mean, because everybody's taste is different. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a little bit different when you're talking about like the kids
You're
stuff.
a story maker yourself. So, yeah. So here's one for you in terms of Tamara's experiences.
Oh, no.
So one thing that I love is around Halloween, you have these fall fairs, and there's always this one you walk through, and then they you see something standing there, looks like a mannequin or a statue, and they come toward you and, and they freak you out. Have you ever done those? Oh. They're so much fun.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm always the person who screams. I'm the person who screams when you're going through the corn maze and there's like the one, witch that goes, ah! I'm the person who screams in the horror movie when
you're the one who screams in the horror movie?
Well, I'm the one who screams in the horror movie. Hey, there's always that like one fake out where it's like there's a window and the curtain's moving and
you think it's going to come, but it doesn't?
No, and it's like the cat.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I'm the one idiot in the theater who screams at that. Always.
Oh my God. I'm the one person when I'm with my family, I would never do this in the theater, but I'll say something like jump scare coming. I just see it. They're so like predictable sometimes. I'm like, jump scare coming, watch out.
Yeah. And I do that with plot. Like I'll be sitting like with anything. I'll be sitting next to my husband on the couch and we watch something and all of a sudden I'll just go, oh. And he'll look at me and go, don't tell me.
That's so good.
And now the funny thing is my daughter's picked up doing that.
Yeah. My family's also like, how did you know? How did you know it was going to be? Like I always, like I just watched Sweet Tooth. And I'm like, oh, it's doing the so-and-so. They're the villain. Like, how do you know? How can you tell? I'm like, you can tell.
You were accusing me of delivering spoilers earlier today? Come on. You're delivering spoilers all the time.
I didn't say who it is. I just said I figured out who it is.
All
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. But I would only do this with family because they know me. Right. And I don't mind spoiling it for them. But as far as my feeling on this movie for the vibes, it did what I wanted my horror movie to do, which is
Mm-hmm.
creep me out and also make me think.
Yeah.
Not too much, but it accomplished that for me.
Yeah.
So
No,
for
I
me,
would.
yeah.
I'm in total agreement on that. Like, I'm going to be very honest. This is not a movie I ever would have watched on my own. This is not something I would have like clicked on if it came up on my streaming menu. Like, I don't do these movies.
But you're glad you
That-
did?
Yeah, I was gonna say like
Oh, did I
thank you to
spoil it?
our producers. Like, I'm
Yeah.
glad I saw this movie because I think it's
Yeah.
a really smart movie.
I agree wholeheartedly. It's a really smart movie.
Yeah, so I
Like
think
my co-host.
like my co-host. So I think it
I don't
flies
believe
for the
it's
vibes
smart.
for sure.
This is one of those rare times where it flies on the science, it flies on the story, and it flies on the vibe. Now, I don't know if that's because you and I are, biased because like it really hit home for me. It really hit home for me.
Well, no,
right?
I actually think that is part of what's interesting about us being in agreement about all of it, because for me, this is not my story. So, and yet I thought it was incredibly effective.
There
So
you go.
you had a more personal connection to it.
Yeah.
I had a less personal connection to it. And yet I still think it was remarkably effective.
Nice. I think I love that perspective. So yeah, that is what we call averaging out the nuisance factors. So it averaged out to it, the probability of our determination being accurate by a large number of people has increased given that analysis.
Oh my God. I'm so taking the phrase nuisance factor into my life. That is the gift you have given me on this podcast this week.
Averaging out the nuisance factors. All right. Thank you guys for joining us.
Absolutely. We have a new episode that drops usually every Friday. You can find us at doesitflypod.com. That's where you can find all of our episodes. You can, of course, find us on YouTube, all the usual channels. You can also check us out on TikTok at doesitflypod, Instagram, all the places. And let us know in the comments what you thought of this episode and what you think of this movie and all this stuff about the horror genre that we have been talking about.
Yes. And you can also find us, Tamara Krinsky, Hakeem Oluseyi. Look us up and join us every week.
Thanks
or
again.
Just let them save up and what's that called? Where you just watch everything at once?
Binge.
Yeah, binge watch them. They're good. Take care, guys.
I'm going to leave you with a smile.